Human history follows a startlingly consistent rhythm. Across thousands of years, completely unrelated superpowers hit the same structural wall after roughly 250 years. The ancient Assyrians expanded through the Middle East, ruled for 10 generations, and collapsed. The Persian Empire rose from those ruins, built a world-spanning bureaucracy, and burnt out within the same timeframe. The Spanish Empire dominated global trade routes for centuries before its treasury and influence exhausted right on schedule. Even the Romanovs followed this trajectory, presiding over a massive Eurasian power for 250 years before the system fractured in 1917. Historian Sir John Glubb identified this pattern by studying 11 distinct empires. He found that their lifespans remained constant, regardless of changes in transportation, communication, or military technology. Glubb attributed this limit to human biology. 10 generations marks the point where the collective discipline required to build an empire finally dissolves into the expectation of permanent comfort. Our current global order tracks its true rise to the late 18th century, when the British and American industrial revolutions began rewriting the rules of commerce and energy. If that 250-year constant holds, our generation is currently entering the terminal window of this cycle. Every cycle begins with an age of pioneers, hardy generations forging a new system. They give way to conquest, commerce, and affluence, accumulating unprecedented wealth. Decay begins when the 10th generation takes the system for granted, replacing rugged values with a desperate need for luxury. This shift manifests as hyper-financialization. The state stops producing real goods and starts engineering debt, debasing the currency while the public focuses only on entertainment. Late-stage decadence is a structural inevitability, the mathematical byproduct of 10 generations of compounding comfort. Today, macro-historical theories explain the specific physical pressures that cause these aging empires to buckle under their own weight. Wealthy societies trigger elite overproduction, creating more ambitious claimants than available positions. These frustrated elites fracture, paralyzing the government. To manage this friction, the system adds layers of bureaucracy until the energy cost exceeds the benefits, making collapse the only way to simplify. At the same time, extreme wealth stratification insulates the elites. They remain blind to the decay of real infrastructure and supply chains because their own asset values continue to rise on paper. These structural engines make reform impossible from within. Once the 10th generation realizes the foundation is rotting, the momentum of collapse is irreversible. Western systems are currently facing a cascading failure because they are anchored in hyper-complex debt networks that rely entirely on counterparty trust. However, China provides a historical foil to this linear burnout. When Western empires collapse, their legalistic and individualistic paper networks typically vanish forever, leading to a permanent shattering of the state. China's model is cyclical. It anchors its continuity in the software of Confucian ethics and the hardware of a meritocratic administrative class, the scholar bureaucrats. When a Chinese dynasty reaches its 250-year limit, the state uses the chaos as a mandate of heaven reset. Corrupt leaders are swept away, but the underlying administrative core survives to rebuild the exact same civilization. This allows China to treat a collapse not as a permanent death, but as a civilizational reincarnation. Understanding these two different paths, linear burnout and cyclical rebirth, reveals how to navigate the current transition. We are seeing the historical signatures of this shift right now. As Western paper systems struggle with debasement, global liquidity is moving towards the east, seeking the safety of physical assets like gold and silver. Because late-stage decadence relies on hyper-complex, centralized networks, security now requires operational autonomy. This means maintaining local computing environments independent of the cloud. The only way to survive a breakdown of counterparty trust is to move wealth into zero counterparty realities. This requires transitioning out of highly financialized paper promises and into allocated, physically segregated holdings. A moment of wonder. You cannot stop the biological clock of an empire, but by stepping outside the blast radius of a failing debt system, you can ensure you're prepared for the cycle that follows.